Peter was born in 1943, right during the war. His upbringing was hard. I'll just say really, really hard. His grandfather, because his father was killed in the war, he was raised by his grandfather, who one day was walking along and in a bomb crater saw a violin case. Went down, checked it, and there was a violin in it. His grandfather fixed up the violin, and he was young, 6, 7 years old, was taught to play. They would go out on weekends and play just to
Get some money.
To eat,
Yeah.
you know, whatever they could find. So he grew up playing. He got so good that in fact he was offered a full ride scholarship to the Munich Conservatory. And imagine my grandma, his mom was absolutely ecstatic. He goes, he gets on the train, he goes off, he comes back 2 weeks later, says, Mom, I can't play every day for 10 hours. That's not me. I want to make violins. I heard there's a school down in southern Germany. So he says, you know, my grandma's freaking out. You can imagine this. He says, yeah, you have room and board, full scholarship. And he's like, no, that's all I got to do. She's like, if you go, you're not coming home for 4 years. You'll have to work there in the summer to make money to go. He says, this is what I want to do, Mom. So he goes down, and because he can play the violin, actually gets a spot in the school. They needed a first violinist. Wow. So four years later, he graduates, and now he gets a job. He excelled really. He found his calling, really. And so he gets a job in a great shop, Hama violin shop up in Stuttgart. A little violin, actually a music store here in Salt Lake City called Prier Music, which was located 3 blocks down on 2nd South, writes the school and says, do you have a violin maker? They show it around the place as a joke. Salt Lake where? Right? And my dad says, I'll go. You bet I'll go. And they're like, why? Well, turns out he saw his first movie when he was 16 years old, and it was a Western, and he wanted to be a cowboy. They paid his way over. He didn't know any English.
What year did he come?
This was 1960. So he had his tools in one hand, his violin in the other, and about $5. Gets on the boat, comes over, shows up, and loves it here. 3-4 years later, Prier Music Company, they were older, and so they were retired. He bought out their stock, was there in that location, and then he moved over here, bought this building in late 60s, 68, and started Prier Music Company, which eventually became Peter Prier and Sons. But so he, in 72, actually, yeah, about 71, all these people kept asking, will you teach me how to make violins? Will you teach me how to make violins? And he's like, no, I don't have time. I'm running a full-time shop, starting a family, you know. Will you teach? And finally he says, fine, okay. So he took 3 people and right upstairs here in 1972, started the first class of the violin making school of America.
But now we have to jump forward a generation.
Sorry. Yes.
No, to you. And so often, you know, the cobbler's kids have no shoes and the kids want sandals anyway. So did you want to get into this? And tell us, how are you the one here now, Paul?
Well, I see, growing up, it's always like, what Dad does. You don't want to do it.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah, that's our natural instinct.
It is. You don't want to do what Dad does. So I did everything else. Like I said, I went to film school in California, and wanted to do that. And then I came back, and in the summer, he's like, hey, Paul, and Peter never pressured me. He never asked me to come in. He never, any one of his kids. And we've all worked here.
How many years?
6. And he said, hey, I need some help on the bow bench, the rehairing bows. Could you help me out? No, I'm there for the summer. I'm like, okay, sure. And I was hooked. I fell in love. I couldn't believe it. You know, I was 18, 19, and then started, you know, this is really cool. And I told my dad, you know, hey, it's pretty cool what you do, Dad. Do you know, can I like make bows? I can't do what Dad does, but he makes violins. I'm gonna make bows. And he's like, well, yeah, I've got some colleagues over in France, and France is where bow making is really from, right? That's the height of the bow making culture. He says, do you want to learn to make bows? Well, then I'm gonna go over to France. And I said, okay. So I did. So I went over. That's where I did my internship, I want to call it, my apprenticeship.
Yeah.
So I was over in France for in a total about four years. Learned bow making and then brought that back. And with that, that was right at a time when carbon fiber was becoming very accepted. Well, actually, at that time it wasn't, but it was emerging. So we brought that technology back too, and so we started to make carbon fiber, composite bows as well as the traditional wooden bows here.
Wow. And are you still?
Yeah,
You still.
right above us.
So your father passed away in 2015. And who has carried on the violin making part?
Well, my younger brother, Dan, he is a violin maker. Actually studied here and then studied at the school in Chicago. Now, the school here, it's the only private violin making school in the world.
What?
In the world. Everyone else, all the others are state funded, and so there's other curriculum they have to teach. Peter was very independent, and he said, the U kind of wanted to co-opt this.
I'm sure.
Then he found out how much paperwork there was and said, you know what, that's not me. So it's remained, and today it's the only private one that's still going.
This location, your business, your family is a staple in Salt Lake City. And that's why we wanted to come here.